Tonight on the All Kinds of Weather Forecast, we recap the heartbreaking loss in Jacksonville this weekend. The Gators go down 34-20 and not only lose the game, but may have lost their quarterback for the season. This is the All Kinds of Weather Forecast. And welcome in to another episode of the All Kinds of Weather Forecast. I'm your host, Chris Yanes, joined alongside the founder of the All Kinds of Weather Forecast, Neil Schulman, here to recap the Georgia game in Jacksonville. Another heartbreaking loss this season, and yet another loss to the Georgia Bulldogs, 7 of the last 8 now in the rivalry. But of course, we want to make sure we shout out our sponsors of the show. The All Kinds Weather Forecast is proudly sponsored by 401k Generation, the wealth management company that helps you invest today for your future tomorrow. Their team of advisors is committed to providing guidance and education for your 401k plan and its participants. And they also offer a range of enrollment solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your company's 401k plan. Whether it's saving for your child's college, investment advice, or even your retirement, 401k Generation's team of advisors makes getting to know you their top priority. Their advisors will tailor a path to assist you in navigating life's financial milestones and reaching your financial goals. 401k Generation, building stronger futures, one generation at a time. For more information, contact them at 866-998-5879 or visit their website at 401kgeneration.com. We also want to shout out our apparel sponsor of the show, Heads and Tails. Use the code IAKOW30 for 30% off in-store or online at theheadsandtails.com. As you can see, I'm wearing the Swamp reversible hat that is now available on theheadsandtails.com. We hope you can gear up for this football season there. And of course, make sure if you're watching this show on YouTube, hit that subscribe button down below, leave a like, leave a comment, your reaction to the loss in Jacksonville against the Georgia Bulldogs on Saturday night. And if you're listening on audio platforms, please rate and review the show. Leave a 5-star rating. Helps us bring Gator Nation more great content. All right. So, Neil, the Gators go down 34-20 in a game where Florida, I would say, led for at least half of the game. They certainly had a lot of hope in this game early on when they, hit a big strike after an interception by Devin Moore. But there was a lot of ups and downs in this game. They hung in there as much as they could. And I think really where we have to think about the aftermath of this game in three ways. Tonight we're going to talk about the game itself, right? We have to analyze the game. We have to talk about what actually happened on the field. There's the loss of another quarterback for this, most likely for the season, depending on the severity of the injury for DJ Lagway and what the effects of that are. And then, of course, the topic and the conversation that just will not go away, hanging around like a long summer rainstorm here in Florida, is Billy Napier and the future of him and the future of his program and what we need to do going forward. So first off, we'll talk about the game now. Neil, you were at the game in Jacksonville on Saturday. I was watching from afar in Jacksonville. Tell the fans what the vibes were like at Florida, Georgia, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Obviously, that's typically a fun time. And then, give us your takeaway from the experience of the game.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I gotta say, I'm first clearly hoarse, as you can see. Had a great time. It's always a vibe in Jacksonville, and in between bouts of the fans getting beaten down by policemen in the stands, it was a lot of fun to interact with other Gator and Dog fans. I was on the Florida side. There were a lot of Georgia fans there on the Florida side. I'd say it was probably 70-30 Georgia in the stands. The other side was all red and black, and our side was more blue than red, but still clearly some red in there. So I'd say overall 70-30, 75-25, somewhere in that range. And Georgia fans were awesome. I've heard nothing but horror stories about Georgia fans. And that just hasn't been my experience. This is my fourth cocktail party. All 4 years, Georgia fans have been awesome. I mean, I'm the guy that's made waves in the South Carolina fan base for pissing off their fans with my stories of them being horrible. But that's just not my experience with Georgia. They were incredible. When DJ Lagway got hurt, they're like, "Oh no, oh that's your guy. Oh no, we don't want that." They were gasping. They were genuinely concerned for his well-being. And after the game, they were like holding their fists up, like fist bump, like, good game, good game, good game. Hey, I hope your quarterback is okay. I really hate to see that. A lot of them saying these kinds of things. And that's awesome. That's what sports are supposed to be about. We hear stories of fans getting in fights at games and throwing beer bottles and stuff and just terrible behavior. But that just hasn't been my experience in four cocktail parties. So shout out Georgia fans for that. And then the game itself, you know, I feel like we're going to talk about all the negatives at various points on the show, and we have to because it's another loss. It's four straight losses to Georgia. That's not good. That's the first time since 1980 to 83 that that's happened. So clearly there's got to be some what the Pollyannas call negativity on the show. But you know what? The Gators did fight. It is a talking point among those what I call sunshine pumpers, but it's true. It's a legitimate point that I think we should be talking about because the Gators did play a lot better than I thought they were going to, especially after their quarterback DJ Lagway goes down. The offensive line, I thought, at least on paper, was going to be manhandled. That wasn't the case. They did a lot better than I thought they were going to do against the defensive line in Georgia that's really, really talented. They paved the way, especially on that one drive. They paved the way for Jacoby Jackson to run, which I never would have predicted in a million years. I thought if Florida was going to win this game or even score points, it would be because DJ Lagway made throws through the air. But then when you have Aiden Warner in the game, which no offense to him, keep it respectful, but keep it real, pretty much means we don't have a passing game. Georgia knows that all we can do to move the ball is run the football. We still managed to move the football on them. Also on defense, guys like Cam Jackson put some nice things on tape again. I wouldn't say the defensive line dominated, but as a whole, they looked respectable. They held their own. Jack Pyburn did his job. He had those quotes this week in the media sessions, and he backed it up. He backed up his words. Great game on tape. Pick. Love that. Derek Wingo, we interviewed him in all kinds of weather forecast show alumni. Great game from him from the fifth game senior. Freshman Miles Graham had a nice game. Seeing both ends of the generational spectrum there, the fifth year senior and the freshman Miles Graham both doing some nice things. Aaron Gates had a tremendous game, graded out very high on PFF, and so on and so on and so forth. There's a lot of good stuff to take from this game. And when it's time to start talking about next year, Chris, whether it's and I hope it's not Billy Napier, but if it's with him or with another coach, we can talk about how there are some guys coming back. Unfortunately, not Cam Jackson or Jarek Wingo, but we can talk about guys like Miles Graham or an Aaron Gates, assuming Florida holds on to them. Not to mention DJ Lagway, assuming that his hamstring heals, which I think we can agree probably will for next year pending the MRI results. Point being, we do have something to be positive about. We do have some things to be positive about when the time comes to turn the page for 2025. But for this game, I do want to say I did recognize that fight. I do appreciate it, and I do notice it.
Yeah, the team hasn't quit on the coach. They haven't quit on the season, and even when DJ Lagway went down, there was still more than basically two-thirds of the game remaining, and the game could have gotten away from Florida very quickly from that point on. I mean, if we had just completely stalled out on offense, not moved the ball whatsoever, not scored, Georgia could have honestly. And we've seen it in other Florida Georgias, like I think back to 2021, where Florida was, only down 3-0 at one point, and then the onslaught of pick sixes and turnovers, and Georgia just racked up a crazy amount of points in that game and put us away before halftime before we could even blink. That could have easily happened in this game. It didn't, and as a tribute to what the players did on both sides of the ball, on the offense and the defense, I think it's really safe to say that the defense has really stepped up their play. It's not just against inferior opponents. Georgia is a very good team. Now, albeit I do think Carson Beck clearly has his limitations. And if I were to compare the two starting quarterbacks going into this game healthy, I would much rather have DJ Lagway. I think he's a better quarterback than Carson Beck. Carson Beck hurt Georgia. I think ultimately Georgia will not win a national championship this year because Carson Beck is their quarterback. He has turning the ball over and is such a liability that it's Georgia probably, if they had even an average quarterback, could have probably put Florida away much sooner. So, but that is still Florida's defense made the plays. They forced the turnovers. I said going into the game, we needed to be +2 in the turnover margin to have a chance. We achieved that. At one point, we were actually +3 until the very last few minutes of the game when Aiden Warner threw an interception when Florida needed to drive to tie the game. They did a lot of good things to get Florida in this game, and their hats off to them for that. So All right, let's talk about the offense, and then we'll talk about the defense, and kind of just giving fans a little bit of a recap of the game. And the offense did start slow in this matchup. DJ Lagway would ultimately finish the game 2 for 6, 47 yards. Obviously, the one touchdown to Aiden Mizell, but Devin Moore was the one that kicked this off, intercepting Carson Beck. That was his second interception in the last 2 weeks as a Gator. He has currently locked down that opposite corner spot with now that Jason Marshall is out for the season. We were really high on him going into the year, and he has stepped it up, play up. I love the fact that the next play after that interception, Florida opted to hit the jugular and hit Aiden Mizell on the 43-yard touchdown pass from DJ Lagway. Mizell finished the day 4 catches for 66 yards, which was a career high. Aiden Warner did relieve, obviously, DJ Lagway, though, later in the game in the second quarter when he went down with a hamstring injury, was carted off the field. Aiden Warner finished the half 2 for 4, 8 yards, and then ultimately finished the day with 7 of 22, 66 yards and an interception. So obviously not good enough. The offense was clearly limited, like you mentioned, Neil, after he went down. The run game, by committee between Jaden Baugh and Jacoby Jackson was solid. Jaden Baugh rushed 17 times for 64 yards. Jacoby Jackson 12 times for 74, capping off that one touchdown that tied the game in the fourth quarter. Elijah Badger played a decent game in this one as well, but the offense clearly was limited without DJ Lagway. This was not the same team. The play calling immensely changed. Florida, I said also going into the game, needed to hit some big plays, the explosive plays. They needed I thought at least 10. They finished with 6. And a lot of those I guess half of them occurred after DJ Lagway went down. There was the 26-yard reception from Aiden Warner in the fourth quarter. Jacoby Jackson's 15-yard touchdown run, and then Aiden Mizell's 16-yard catch in the fourth quarter as well. So not enough offense. And I think if Lagway had remained in the game, we probably would have seen a little bit more from him in that. So anything in particular, Neil, you want to point out, I guess, on the offensive side of things? I think, if you look at the stat line, I mean, 259 total yards of offense. So by far the worst offensive performance since the Miami game for the Gators. Only 113 passing, obviously because of Lagway. The 146 rushing, we only averaged 3.9 per carry, and trailed in the time of possession for the game. So obviously not perfect. And I think it was clear that Florida really was hanging on for dear life on the offensive side once Lagway went down.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious point that people are talking about now is who's to blame for Lagway's injury. I mean, you want to blame the turf in Shad Khan's paradise in Jacksonville for not being resodded, which, by the way, it was. So we can't really say that. Do you want to blame the play calling on Billy Napier? Do you want to blame Lagway for not audibling out? I've heard some people say that. I don't think that's particularly bright to make that claim. But all right, people are talking about it. I will say that I hate Billy Napier as a play caller. I loathe his play calling. I loathe his offense. This is not his fault. That's not fair. There's absolutely no cause and effect relationship between the play call and DJ Lagway getting hurt. You can't say that. The entire offense is predicated on DJ Lagway being able to move. So you got to show that. You got to show something that keeps reminding Georgia of that fact. Now, the QB power is not my favorite play call in the world because it's begging for Lagway to get plastered, even as big as he is. You'd rather him not invite contact when the game's not on the line in the second quarter. But that's one where I can say, all right, fine, agree or disagree. Not my preferred play call, but difference of opinion. Okay, I understand what you're trying to do there. So that's number one. That's not on Napier. Number two is that a lot of Florida fans are saying that Florida was going to win if Lagway stayed healthy throughout the course of the game. And I just want to ask this question, and y'all let me know in the comments if you're one of the people who think this. Based on what information exactly? What data, what evidence do you have to back that up? Because of one throw that DJ Lagway made, he completed a grand total of 2 passes on this day. And coming into this game, Billy Napier had a 15-17 record. So the totality of the data says, as I've been saying all year long, that Napier is a loser. He just finds ways to lose games. And when he isn't not able to find one, he invents one, like the double jersey penalty against Utah. I've never seen that before in my life, and I haven't seen it since. He'll invent ways to lose because that's who he is. So why was this game going to be any different? Especially when he's 1-9 against rivals coming into this game. How do you know that Lagway wasn't going to have another one of those freshman moments like he had against Tennessee? How do you know there wasn't going to be a miscommunication that wasn't even Lagway's fault, where a receiver runs the wrong route and Lagway throws it right to a defensive player for Georgia and it's a pick six? How do you know that's not going to happen? The point being is that I'm a huge fan of DJ Lagway as both a player and a person. I think the world of him in both terms, but he's not exactly a Heisman Trophy candidate right now. He's a very good quarterback as it stands as a freshman. He can do a lot of great things, but keeping him healthy throughout the course of the game is no guarantee of anything, especially when we saw that Georgia wasn't giving him a ton aside from the one throw to Aiden Mizell. So we don't know. Florida might have won. Florida might have gotten buried even worse than they did if Lagway got flustered because he's a freshman. Could happen. So we just don't know that. So I would appreciate it if we could stop with that bit of intellectual dishonesty. And then the last takeaway is the one I touched on earlier, that the offensive line deserves medals of valor because Georgia knew exactly what Florida was going to be doing once Aiden Warner came in the game. And we saw the first two passes from him and the resounding, oh no, that's our new quarterback. He's got a 7-yard dig route open and he throws the ball 5 yards short. He like throws infield practice to him. That's our new quarterback. Georgia knows that too. So they load the box and they dare Warner to try to beat them through the air. He's not able to do that. Florida does exactly what Georgia knows they're going to do. And the Gators can still move the ball at all. That's a huge win. That's a huge testament to those guys on the offensive line. And in the cases of guys like Austin Barber and Jake Slaughter, they're going to impress a lot of NFL general managers and scouts and coaches with that game tape. And in the cases of guys who are coming back to Florida, or even guys who are going to transfer out of Florida, they're making some great cases for themselves for playing time down the road. So I'm very impressed with the offensive line. They deserve all the respect in the world for that.
Yeah, Jake Slaughter was the highest graded PFF offensive player at 69.9. Austin Barber was in the top 10. So they did play great games. And shout out Austin Barber, obviously playing in front of his hometown crowd for this game. And a lot of those Georgia guys want to show up. Jack Pyburn, obviously another one getting that first career interception. And that's a drive where it was kind of a wasted opportunity for Florida. Florida was set up with some very good field position there, unable to capitalize. That could have made the difference late in the game. But, once again, like you said, like it's hard to, when Georgia knew what we were doing, it was really difficult to move the ball. And credit to Aiden Warner. He hit some big plays on that drive when we ended up tying the game. There was the 3rd and long where he did hit Elijah Badger down the sideline. It was a beautiful throw and an even better catch. That set Florida up. But yeah, I mean, Florida, right before halftime where they tacked on an extra field goal, that was all running the football. There was almost no passes that actually set up that field goal for Trey Smack at the end of the half. And Aiden, Jacoby Jackson, Jaden Ball, they ran like madmen behind that offensive line, and there was a lot of a lot of yards after, or not yak,
Well, yards after contact.
yards after
Yeah.
contact. Sure, yeah, yards after contact, and I think that's just a credit for these guys fighting. They fought through this game, and they knew that it was going to be difficult and tough sledding from there. I think the one thing I will say though, and I guess this is another point of conversation, is if the game had played out exactly on the defensive side, had it the way it did for Florida, which is you get that Jack Pyburn interception at a halftime, and DJ Lagway gets the field that he got. I have a just a slightly difficult. I struggle with that. He wouldn't capitalize on that because
Maybe.
I do think that the play calling would have been different. I do think Lagway is an athlete that probably could have made some more plays in this game. Perhaps we score another touchdown before halftime that put Georgia in a position where they weren't able. Because I mean, really, if you look at Georgia's offense, they were set up on the one touchdown where they ended up taking the lead on one of the worst special teams plays, I think, in the Billy Napier tenure, which is hard to believe, but the bad snap by Rocco Underwood, which went 20, 30 yards down the field, which Georgia recovered and then scored later to take the lead on that drive. And then there was the interception at the end of the game, which they scored on. Outside of that, there was really only one drive, Neil, where they went down and scored a touchdown on their own. So I know that the history of Billy Napier. I understand it. He may have coached himself into another loss, even with DJ Lagway playing the remaining of the game. That is certainly a viable opinion. But there is no doubt the way that Florida's defense played and how poorly Carson Beck played. I do believe that it probably makes a difference in this game. The way it was playing out for the totality of the game.
I have to say, if you didn't watch the game, but you just looked at the box score, you would take one look and go, "Oh my God, Florida's defense was horrible.
Not at all.
457 yards." But I mean, I was tweeting this throughout the game too. The defense is doing fantastic. At some point, the levee is going to snap, and it's
Yep.
just going to be an onslaught. It's going to be an avalanche of points, which happened at the end. I mean, holding Georgia to 6 points in the first half is itself quite an achievement. I will say that Georgia did move the ball in that first half, but they could not capitalize, in part because Beck made mistakes, also in part because Florida forced those mistakes. And like I said at the start of the show, the game tape was good. Jack Pyburn did some great things aside, I mean, the pick, obviously, but he set the edge with violence a couple of times, as he said. Cam Jackson was everywhere. Joey Slackman with a tackle. We haven't heard his name much this year. He got in on that. Finally got to see him make some contributions. Love that for him. The Gators just could not hang with a more talented team for 60 minutes. They tried, and I give them credit for that. But here's where the pod's going to turn to the next phase, Chris. You know, 15 and 18 for Billy Napier, 10 and 18 against Power Five opponents. He's 1 and 10 against his rivals. I just don't think that trying and good effort is good enough anymore. You got to get some wins, and this was a golden chance to get one. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that this was a very, very suboptimal situation for him with Lagway going down. Nonetheless, it's another chance that Florida had that they could not capitalize on.
Yeah, I think, I guess we'll go in this direction now, and we'll talk about kind of the subject of Billy Napier once again in this game. I agree. I tweeted out after the game. I said, because a lot of fans now are going to say, and even maybe the administration is going to try to make this excuse that, well, he's lost his two quarterbacks this season. Of course, he was going to have a losing record. To which I respond, like you said, he's now 15 and 18. He had a losing record before he lost not only DJ Lagway, but Graham Mertz. He had a losing record against all of his rivals, not before he lost DJ Lagway, but before he lost Graham Mertz. And by the time we entered mid-October, our recruiting class was not even in the top 50 for this coming season. So I just don't know what more people need to see that Billy Napier is just not the guy. You are going to be very hard pressed to find a coach in the modern era of college football that has overcome a losing record after 3 seasons that goes on to win a championship of any sort. The only person that I could think of that is even remotely close is Gene Chizik at Auburn. But Gene Chizik at least had a winning, I mean, he had a losing record when he was hired at Auburn, but he at least had a winning record when he entered the
One.
national championship season
Yep.
with Cam Newton. So he at least had shown that he could win some games. And Billy Napier has not shown that whatsoever.
Billy Napier has
Everybody knows that what has to be done here. This is just not, this is a terrible talking point now that we even have to have this conversation. And it's going to get ugly from here, Neil. I mean, Florida is a 22-point underdog to Texas next weekend. They're going to be underdogs to LSU and Ole Miss. And now, because they're not going to be playing with a scholarship quarterback, likely against Florida State, that game may be more of a toss-up now than it should be, even though Florida State is historically bad. So Florida, at best, is probably only going to win 5 games, which is the 4th losing season, which is a losing season every year Billy Napier's been the coach. I understand the heartache of having to fire another coach, buy them out, potentially losing the majority of your roster to the transfer portal. But I think there's just way too much overwhelming data at this point to have a conversation about keeping your head coach?
Yeah, we're past that point. We are so far past that point. I said as I was driving home to my cousin's place in Jacksonville, I was listening to the Steve Russell show, and happy trail, Steve, going to be retiring after the year. He was talking about how some people are going to have a case to fire Billy Napier. My good sir, that case was made before this season even started. That case gained its strongest bullet point yet against Miami, and that case was sealed shut with Texas A&M blowing us out. I don't really care what those two teams have done since. I don't care what their records are. You don't get embarrassed by them in the swamp. You lose on a fluky play at the end. You got a double deflection off a helmet and it ricochets them for a touchdown, or you get screwed by the refs, or they kick a walk-off field goal in a close game. That's a different story. But to get embarrassed by them twice, that's it. That's enough. That's game over. No, 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 no. I don't want to hear what happens next. I don't want to hear fight hard. No, we're done. And then on top of that, you add the Tennessee game and the way we lost that. No, done, over. And by the way, on the subject of might not have a scholarship quarterback, there is one more scholarship quarterback we have that we just haven't played this year, whose name is Clay Millen, who in 2022 set an NCAA FBS freshman record for completing 72.2% of his passes. Now, when Lagway went hurt and Aiden Warder came on the field and his first two passes missed very badly, my phone started blowing up. Where is Clay Millen? We got that Colorado State kid, right? What happened to him? Well, my first thought was, all right, this is the Georgia game. This is game 8, which means there are 4 games left in the season, which means Napier's probably trying to save his red shirt because you can play 4 games in a season without having to burn a red shirt season. And then with 5 seconds of researching the kid, I turned up an interesting statistic. He's already used that freshman season. In 2021 at Nevada, he played 2 games there, used a red shirt, transferred to Colorado State. You can't just keep redshirting every single year because you want to get another shot somewhere else. No, you get to use it once. And if you get hurt, if you get badly injured, you can get a medical red shirt. But you can't just keep playing 4 games or less every year and get unlimited numbers of red shirts until the end of time. Like, it doesn't work that way. So that argument is gone. So the only reason that Napier played Aiden Warner over Clay Millen, or the only conceivable reasons, one of two. One, Napier has some reason to believe that Aiden Warner is better, which, okay, maybe he practices better. Fair opinion. I'm not there watching every practice. So that could be. Or number 2 is that Napier also thought that he was going to be preserving Clay Millen's red shirt and didn't do his research or just forgot about it, which means that we have a coach who we were sworn to that does his due diligence on what is put into his cup of coffee every morning and has this army of staffers to double and triple and quadruple and quintuple check everything, and he overlooked that statistic. So if it's option 1, clearly Aiden Warner is not it on the field on game day, at least against Georgia, he's not. Maybe when the competition level decreases against an FSU team or even an Ole Miss team, maybe he'll look better. But we saw what we saw against Georgia. Clearly, the preparation was not there for him. So, preparation meets opportunity, right? No, that wasn't there. So either he wrongly thought that Aiden Millen gave Florida the best chance to win with a roster or the QB room minus Graham Mertz, minus DJ Lagway, or he failed to do his due diligence. And frankly, I don't know which is worse because I don't expect your third string quarterback to be a Heisman Trophy candidate. I don't expect him to be another Cardale Jones. I tweeted that out last night. I didn't mean it literally. Like, of course, in the NIL and transfer portal era, you're not going to have that because guys are always going to go to their next spot. But what I would expect is for a quarterback on the third string to at least be the style of quarterback that Napier wants. And for Napier's offense, if you can even call it an offense, for Napier's offense to work, you need someone who can at least be a threat to run the ball. Aiden Warner's not that. Clay Millen is not exactly Jeff Demps as a runner, but he can at least somewhat run, and he can at least complete some passes, and yet we did not see him on that field. So again, I'm not asking for a Cardale Jones as our QB3. How about a Tyler Murphy? How about a Max Brown? He was a perfectly good third string quarterback last year, even though he was more of a second string quarterback. You'd take that in a heartbeat and say, okay, you're down to your third string guy. At least he can sort of run. At least he can sort of hit some throws. You feel kind of good about it relative to what it could be with a third string quarterback because he could do a lot worse than that. The bottom line is Florida's QB3 situation could be a lot better than it is. And that, however you want to put this on Napier, somehow does fall on Napier. And as we saw, the result was a quarterback who just could not complete a pass.
Yeah, it's a bizarre situation that you would go out of your way to get this kid in the transfer portal and ultimately not give him even a look in this game when he was struggling because it was obvious that Warner was struggling to move the ball at times. I mean, the only way that the ball was really moving was when we were actually bullying him up front with our offensive line, like he talked about, and Jacoby Jackson or Jaden Ball were able to run through the tackles. But Warner, 7 of 22 for 66 yards. I mean, that's not good. That's not good enough to beat the number 2 team in the country. So I think that at least could have shaken it up for a drive just to see if Clay Millen has any semblance of game in him where he could have maybe, flipped the script a little bit on Georgia. But we didn't even get an opportunity to see that. I guess I would imagine he's the backup going forward. And oddly enough, the backup behind the backup is Lawrence Wright the fourth, which is Lawrence Wright's son. So he, a legacy Gator getting his potential opportunity there maybe down the stretch here. We'll see. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but it's crazy to think Napier just does so many bizarre things where I think the average fan or the average coach wouldn't seemingly do. Like to me, you just wouldn't seemingly throw to the Wolves a walk-on transfer who was playing in the Ivy League last year. I mean, at least Clay Millen had played FBS opponents going into this game. It's very bizarre, but like you said, we're not at practice, so we'll give somewhat the benefit of the doubt there. But just for all of the things that Napier does and how tactical he is and how calculated he is and supposedly how detail oriented he is, he seemingly just overthinks everything. And analysis by paralysis truly, I believe, will be his downfall here at the University of Florida. He overthinks everything and then as a result complicates everything to where he fails. And it cost him so dearly in massive moments of these games where if he had just not overthought it, all of these close games that Florida has lost in his tenure potentially flip the other way, and we're having a completely different conversation. The last thing I'll point out before we move on to talking a little bit more about the rest of the season and this roster, the bottom line is Napier buried himself in a hole here. We how many times, Neil, in the last several years have we said we almost won that game? This was another one. We almost won the Georgia game. We almost won the Tennessee game. We almost won the FSU game last year. We almost won the Missouri game last year. If it weren't for a 4th and 17, if Trace Mack if he would have made that field goal, or if we didn't run guys on the field and get an illegal procedure penalty, we make a bowl game last year. I go on and on and on, all the way back to 2022 as well. There are so many almost with Billy Napier, and almost is not going to cut it as the University of Florida head coach because the Gator standard is championships. The Gator standard are those blue letters and numbers on the orange wall at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. And for now, Georgia, our biggest rival in the SEC, has now beat us 7 of the last 8 years. They have out-recruited us for the last decade. Kirby Smart has now won 2 national championships since he's arrived at Georgia, has won 2 SEC championships, and has played for double that. Are the administration and the boosters with any influence tired of it? Because I know you and I are, and I know the majority of this fan base is, but people with influence and power of the situation have got to look at that and say, this is unacceptable, and we have to take control because we cannot let almost dictate the future of this program.
Almost is a great talking point for year 1. It's not a talking point at all in year 3. Period. End of conversation. And on top of that, not only is it not a good talking point to discuss almost and fought hard, and we came so close, and if onlys, Chris, the reason that we have all those almost and if onlys and these one score losses is because of things that Billy Napier did to put himself behind the eight ball, or in some cases didn't do. Chris, go back to 2022, the South Carolina game. I keep referencing that over and over. You have everything under the sun on special teams go wrong. You give up a fake punt touchdown. You get a field goal blocked. You can't put the hole down for another one. You almost snap it over the guy's head on yet another one. You muff a punt. You give up a 40-yard punt return, and then you give up a face mask penalty at the end of that. And the very next week, Jason Marshall fumbles the punt in the end zone to lose to Vanderbilt. Also in that game, Adam Mihalik misses an extra point. You'd think Napier does something to address the special teams after that year. He doesn't. What happens the first game of the very next year? Well, we have two guys with the number 3 run onto the field. That directly cost us the Utah game. Also in that season, we have Dijon Johnson with the fatal leaping penalty against Kentucky. Very next play, Ray Davis goes the length of the field on us and scores. And that season also ends with our field goal team running onto the field and triggering a substitution infraction penalty because they could not do so correctly under the rules of the game. And FSU, even Keon Coleman ripping off a 45-yard punt return to help flip the momentum in that game as well. Also, Billy Napier's failure to hire an offensive coordinator, which I had thought he was going to do this year, hasn't done it. Offensive play calling has screwed Florida repeatedly throughout his almost 3 seasons now at Florida. You can talk about the shovel pass after a fake jet sweep to Ricky Pearsall against Utah to Dante Zanders, which gets stuffed on 4th and 3. You can talk about the double reverse against FSU that killed us in that game, the lack of urgency that killed us against Kentucky last year. I can go on. At the Tennessee game this year, I can go on and on and on. And the point is, these were all things that Napier did to himself. He insisted that he knew best, that his 2 offensive line coach approach, which, by the way, is still, I would say, not giving us an elite offensive line. They were very good against Georgia, but I would say that the payoff for having 2 offensive line coaches does not that we have gotten the path that we've gotten does not merit the calamity on special teams that we've been forced to witness for the past 2 2/3 seasons. So that's a mistake. You can't say it's anything else. That's a blunder by Napier. You can't say that his refusal to hire a real offensive coordinator has been a good move because of all the boneheaded play calls he's been responsible for throughout the past 2 2/3 seasons. He was the one who insisted that Graham Mertz be the starting quarterback throughout the course of this year. That should have been over and done with after the Samford game, which Lagway, I know, against an FCS team, but nonetheless looked great against. Instead, he was forced to split reps throughout the next several games until Mertz got hurt in the Tennessee game. But before he did, Mertz also fumbled the ball away at the 1-yard line, despite the fact that DJ Lagway outweighs him by a solid 25 pounds of solid muscle and should have been the one taking that QB sneak through the offensive line there. So there has been self-inflicted wound after self-inflicted wound after self-inflicted wound. The special teams even now continues to screw Florida up. In the last 3 weeks alone, we have had another substitution infraction on a field goal, which cost us another game. Kentucky, I know we blew them out, but still giving up a kick return for a touchdown is not exactly something that inspires a lot of confidence in you. And now we have Rocco Underwood snapping the ball a mile over the holder's head. And no, you can't blame that directly on Billy Napier. Of course, you can't blame that on Napier. Rocco Underwood's been very good for us all year long. He's been rock solid, no pun intended. He's been rock solid for us all year long. But it's just another example to go along with the avalanche of them that we've accumulated to this point. So the bottom line is there's no pity for Billy Napier. I am sorry that you lost your quarterback. That's never good. Aside from the personal feelings that we have for a great kid in DJ Lagway, ruining his hamstring, apparently. We feel terrible for the kid, but I do feel bad for Napier in that sense, but not bad enough to overlook the myriad of other issues that he has inflicted upon himself.
No doubt. Absolutely. I think you definitely covered, the litany of things that have plagued this program now for the last 3 years with Napier. And it's just a lot of evidence, overwhelming evidence that we need to move on at this point. So moving on though, through the rest of the season, Florida, of course, now 4-4, 2-3 in conference play, will be underdogs in their next three opponents versus Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss, respectively. Looking at the updated matchup predictor on ESPN's FPI, Florida has a 9% chance to beat Texas this weekend. They
Wait,
still
that
have,
went up. That went up a lot. It was like
yeah.
four.
Oh,
Wow.
I don't know. When was it for?
It was a week ago before
Yeah.
the Georgia game.
This, and I think this may not be updated yet, quite frankly, because I'm actually looking at the LSU one. It's 41%. It was 41% last week when we talked about this game. Ole Miss is 22%. That's a
And
little bit,
FSU's went up.
you know,
FSU's went up. That was
yeah,
74%. It's at 77 now. So that's
yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I know. Then again, FSU is pretty bad. They lost 35-11 to a North Carolina team that isn't exactly up to snuff this year either. Mac Brown's days at that school might also be numbered. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, let's be honest. That Florida State game is probably going to be on the Hallmark Channel Thanksgiving weekend. So, it is what it is there, but and I guess Florida is, if they win that game, they'll at least cash the over on the 4.5 for the season for Vegas. But nonetheless, I mean, the fact that the line came out immediately after this game, it was anywhere from 24 to 22 points. It looks like it's down to minus 21.5, maybe just because that's just a heavy spread to cover, even against a beat up Florida team. But going forward, the injuries have clearly plagued this team. We'll see, I'm sure, go ahead an injury report from the press conference from Billy Napier on Monday. We should be getting Montrell Johnson Jr. back for Texas. But as we've talked about, that injury really hasn't affected Florida the last two games. Florida didn't lose to Tennessee even or to Georgia or the Kentucky game obviously didn't matter, but we didn't lose any games because of the absence of Montrell Johnson. The Jaden Baugh and Jacoby Jackson have done a fine job. Obviously, quarterback, the most important position on your team, is going to be the biggest thing. So we'll get the MRI results from DJ Lagway. We'll probably hear the extent of it. Billy Napier at halftime used the word significant hamstring injury. I was with some friends at the wedding I was attending this past weekend. A couple doctors were there. We all asked the question, what's the timetable for a hamstring injury that's torn? 4 to 6 weeks on average. That's done for the season. I mean, there's only 4 weeks left in the season at this point, so he won't play the rest of the year if it truly is a torn hamstring. And best case, he probably or maybe misses 2 games, but by that point, you may not even be bowl eligible by the time you get to the Florida State game. So
Well,
it's just
I should point out he was walking to the bus without the use of crutches. So that's
that
a good sign.
I had heard that. Yeah, there was, I guess, somebody had put that out, I think, on Instagram. But significant though. Fingers crossed. Maybe we'll get a gift from God here late in the season. We certainly could use it with Lagway at the quarterback. I mean, I think my hope for some victories, would go back up again. Maybe the ones at home, and certainly against Florida State. But I think, Neil, when I look at the rest of the schedule, because I think you and I are out on Napier, I think everybody in this fan base is counting the days down until Napier's fired. We see the chyron at the bottom of ESPN or the report from Pete Thamel on Twitter that he's finally being relieved of his duties, and maybe hopefully Scott Strickland along with him. Beggars can't be choosers here. I don't know. But nonetheless, we want this to be over. I think what I do want to see, though, for the remainder of this season is I want to see the guys that are truly bought into being a Gator, because the way they've played the last couple of weeks, I understand they're playing for a coach, but I do believe there are a lot of guys on this team that really love the logo, that really love being Gators. You got a lot of Gator legacies on this team. Ada Mizell's parents are Gator legacies. Jack Pyburn's parents are Gator legacies. Miles Graham dad obviously is Ernest Graham. Go down the list. There's a lot of guys that have a lot of pride for the logo. They grew up cheering for it. I want to see who's bought in going forward, because, if you just look at what Florida has potentially coming back next season, right? If you could convince DJ Lagway to return, you have him as your quarterback, Jaden Baugh as your running back, Mizell, Tank Wilson as your receivers. We'll see what happens with Eugene Wilson. I think there's a lot of rumors flying out there. We don't want to speculate at this time, but he did sit out of this Georgia game. Hayden Hansen at tight end, Pyburn and McCray at the edge positions. You got a really strong linebacker room and Pup, Shamar, Robinson, Miles, and Childs. And then our DB room with Gates, who played by far maybe the best defensive performance out of the defense, especially from the secondary. I mean, there's a lot of good pieces here. A strong youth movement. I mean, we'll give Billy Napier credit that he's brought in some talented players. I want to see who's bought in from that group, because whoever fights through this season and comes out on the other side, maybe there's some champions in that group, or when we do hire the next coach, and if we're able to retain them through efforts of NIL and re-recruiting these guys back into the program, there's some hope that we can turn this thing around relatively quickly because there are, I think, are a lot of talented players on this team.
Well, I mean, the next coach is going to have to go portal because unfortunately, Billy Napier's recruiting class 2025 is kind of terrible. It's not even in the top 50 in the
Yeah.
country. But I think that you're ultimately right in that we're going to see, and we both touch on this now, by the way. We agree on this, that we're going to see in these next four games who is taking their audition to be members of the 2025 team very seriously. And I think in some cases, you'll get some guys who are going to transfer out who are going to be auditioning for themselves. But even in that case, even still, that's still better than a team that's quit. And we've seen that in the past. Like 2017 Missouri game, that like 11 a.m. kickoff, that was ugly. 2021 South Carolina, which is where my hatred for that fan base started, that was a team that quit. Now, you don't want to throw a team a parade and hand them all cookies because they don't quit. That's the bare minimum of what you'd expect from a Florida Gator football player, especially in the age of NIL money. But even still, it does happen in college football. And I think that it is refreshing to just get something, just get anything to feel good about. And the people who get after me on social media, especially on Twitter, really for being too negative, for not looking at any positive. Well, here you go. I want to see who wants to be here next year. And I'm looking for that specifically starting against Texas because well, I mean LSU too, but those are your chances to go up against teams better than you. Ole Miss, I don't think is better than Florida. I know their record is. They undoubtedly have a better coach than Florida does, and the talent may be better, but if it is, it's negligible and it's done through the portal. So, hit or miss there. 247 Sport Talent Composite, by the way, still says Florida's more talented. And then FSU is a rivalry game. If you can't get up for that one, you don't belong in college football, period. So these next two games against Texas and Louisiana State are against programs that probably, in a lot of cases, turned you down in some point. Either they didn't offer you a scholarship or they did, but they didn't really go after you with a lot of vigor. So be pissed. Like I said, going into this Georgia game, which by the way, I'm going to check that off. They did show me something. The players did show me something. They didn't win the game, but they did show me some effort. Show it some more. Show it to me against Texas on the road, where you're a 3 touchdown underdog. Show it against LSU, who has owned you for the past half decade. Show me something and show it to me consistently. And then I'll start to feel genuinely good about the direction of the program should we then hire the next head coach. And that's a whole different debate because you got to hire the right president who has to hire the right AD, who has to have the right attitude about NIL and all that good stuff. But then at least there's something that we can hang our hats on if other stars align themselves in the right way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I know. I think I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment that if these guys could just play with a little bit of heart and audition for to be on the 2025 team, we're going to at least have some memorable moments to finish the season and won't be completely miserable through it all. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And I think they're just a lot. I love a lot of these young guys on this team. They're fighting out there. They're playing hard, and I think they're talented too. I think with a better coaching staff, this team would be much better than 4-4. I think they'd have at least two more wins on the schedule this season, if not more. I don't think Neil and just kind of looking at it, I don't think this schedule turned out to be as difficult as people
It's
thought it was,
not. That's the
and that's
funny thing. It's
so
not.
unfortunate. It is so unfortunate because I mean, you look at Miami. Miami resembles the 2020 Florida Gators. Heisman Trophy candidate, elite offense, horrible defense, horrible. Miami, I mean, they outscore you. But when they get to the playoff, they're going to play teams with much better defenses and are going to be able to stop a few nosebleeds a game, which they're not playing teams that are able to do that right now. But they'll get there. And I think if we had played this Miami team with this defense, it would have been a better game in the swamp. You look at A&M. A&M just got boat raced by South Carolina. And I know that they beat LSU, but I mean, dang, like they got boat raced by Shane Beamer and those boys. And South Carolina, I think, is better than a lot of people thought, but still, I think that Florida, that's another game where we probably could have competed if our if maybe our quarterback situation was a little bit more ironed out and our defense actually showed up in the first half of that game. And then, of course, we all know we don't want to, rehash Tennessee and Georgia now, but like just looking at it, Florida really should have been in all these games if they had just a competent coaching staff,
They were in
which
the
we
game. They should
don't.
have won them.
Right. But if we had a competent coaching staff, which we don't, which is just all the more reason we have got to move on. When you look at a schedule before the season, you have no idea. All it is just a piece of paper with a bunch of numbers next to your name. When the games start getting played, that's when things move around. And right now, these games on this schedule did not play out the way we thought they were going to. And there was a lot more opportunities for Florida to win games this season. And that is why it is time to move on from Napier. It is time to turn the page. And let's see if these guys can fight the rest of the season to hopefully audition to be a part of the next regime when they get here to Gainesville.
Well, you're talking about the schedule. How about just you ignored the biggest one of all? FSU was a guaranteed loss coming into the season.
Yeah.
Now it looks like a team that even Aiden Warner should be able to beat by 2 touchdowns. Now,
Yeah.
I realize it's not quite that simple. Rivalry game, anything can happen whenever. It's a very different team than we thought we were going to face. Also,
Absolutely.
Kentucky, a team that we thought was going to be a challenge for us. Look at what's happened to them. They're not even going to make a bowl game this year. They're already 3-6, and they still have to play Texas. That's going to be loss number 7, and they will be joining Florida most likely on the couch for bowl season. So it really turned out to be a much easier, softer schedule than we expected, which is not just me lamenting, by the way, what could have been this year. Because if you think next season is the exact same
Same.
schedule.
Yeah.
So again, you want me to be positive, Twitter people? Here you go. The right coach comes in, he re-recruits enough good players. You've got a shot to get to 7 or 8 wins, barring catastrophes in the injury situation. With a little bit of luck going your way, you could pull 8-4 in your first season next year. So I'm not in the all is lost mode here. There's just, I need to see a little bit more from these current players before I can actually go into this offseason with a good conscience with some positivity.
Yep. Nope. I agree. Definitely agree. All right, Neil, let's get our final thoughts here and then let's call it a show.
Let's do it. Grades, I guess, are I mean, I don't know how you grade the offense. It's not where's Aiden Warner's passing ability going to come off? Like, am I going to take it off the offense or the coaching?
Uh,
And
I don't know.
it's not his
However
fault.
you want now.
He's I mean, all right, the kid is trying his best. Like, I give him all the props in the world. It's to be the quarterback of the Florida Gators is not a situation that most people are meant to do. That's why so many have failed, and the few that have succeeded have been revered as legends because they've overcome so many obstacles along the way to get there. But the fact of the matter is, Aiden Warner is just not it at quarterback, and that's going to hurt the offensive grade. The offense is going to get a C minus. I mean, I think that even that's generous. They're so predictable with the play calling, which I guess is coaching too. But when you have a guy who just can't make that many throws, you're gonna have problems. The offensive line and the running game saved this grade. And then obviously, I mean, the Lagway throw to Mizell was part of it, but and maybe C minus is hard. I'll say C because there is a lot of talent on that Georgia defense. It's not easy to move the ball against them, but it's also not the elite Georgia defense of years past. So I'll say C for them. Defense did far better than the statistics show. 457 yards of offense given up is usually cause for an F grade, but I mean, a lot of that came when the game is over and the dam had already broken. So I'll say the defense gets a B minus for a good but not great overall showing. Special teams, I feel bad for doing this because Trace Mack did hit a couple bombs, but that bad snap from Rocco Underwood was just so calamitous, so disastrous. It's going to fail the whole special teams. It's not going to be that F, like I sometimes say, like a 2 out of 100 or a 5 out of 100 grade where you have to like change your major and just drop out of school. But it's going to be like that 55 to 60 out of 100 grade where, you failed, but a couple of questions you get here or there, right, could have flipped it into a passing grade. But yeah, that lost the game for Florida. Coaching, ah, I really don't. Again, I don't know how to gauge this. I think that Clay Millen had to have done better if he was put in the game over Aiden Warner. But maybe the coaches know something we don't because we're not in practice every day. We don't know how those guys practice. We don't know what kind of teamwork or camaraderie they share with those receivers and timing and all that. We don't know that. So it's hard for me to gauge that. That said, I'll give them a neutral grade of a C. I don't think the coaching, I don't think that the play calling was particularly awful. I would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit more creativity to get the guys, the playmakers, the balls in space. But then when I say that, I remember, well, Aiden Mizell had a nice screen drawn up for him and he just dropped the ball. He had two receivers running
Yep.
interference for him, not literally, but the phrase they were blocking for him down the field could have been a big gain. Guy drops the ball. Like, what do you want Napier to do on that one? That's not his fault. So without really knowing where to go on this, I'll just go neutral and say C. And then I mean, it's a neutral game. Do we want to give the fans a grade for this?
Yeah, I'd do whatever.
I think the fans that were there showed up and showed out. I think they were vastly outnumbered by Georgia, but the ones that were there were loud. They were into it. And yeah, good times as always in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't quite tell what the split was in the stadium, but that's really unfortunate to hear that it was like what you're saying, like 70-30 or 75-25. I mean, because I mean, I've gone to Georgia, Florida, Georgia for over a decade now, and almost always it's at least 55-45. So I would say that, it's a situation where I feel like that's got to change, and that just shows how bad the rivalry's gotten over the years. So
I mean, this is all red. This is, I don't know if you can see it on the phone, but this is
yeah,
all red.
yeah. I mean, I
And
don't
then
know what it looks.
on my side, it was mostly blue, but patterns of red, splatters of. If I can really show that here, but
Yeah,
zoom in a little bit more. That's all. That's 100% red. There's no
yeah.
Florida on the Georgia side, and there are patches of red among the sea of blue on the Florida side.
It's seemingly like they've taken over the Florida side more and more over the last couple of years. I have certainly noticed that, but that's got to start changing. And I think it would if Florida starts becoming a more successful program again and it's a 50-50 split and it's that great atmosphere that we all know and love. I mean, I think back to 2019. I think it was the last time it truly was like a 50-50 split. That was a top 10 matchup going into the game. It was a game down to the wire in the fourth quarter. We got to get back to that. There's no doubt about it. We got to get back to that. So shout out to the Gator fans and you for hanging in there and certainly being loud and proud in there. And then, when watching on TV, you could tell the Gator fans were getting into it at times. So that was good to see. But yeah, that's got to change. And the other thing I was going to say, I'll give my grades here in a second, but I wanted to do something interesting. If you were a Georgia fan, how would you grade Georgia in this game?
I would not grade them highly. I would not. I don't think that Florida is a good team. I think that they fight. I think that they give a lot of effort, and that's
At best, an
great.
average team.
But I think they're below average, frankly. I do.
Yeah.
I think that their grit and what natural talent they do have shows pretty brightly. Like against Tennessee, I think that carried Florida.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Gators made mistakes too. Like there were missed blocks here and there. The Gators did miss a couple tackles. There were busts, and
Yeah.
really the game ended. Georgia pulled away in the end because Florida was one play away from getting the ball back in fairly good field
Yep.
position
Third
on a
at a
third
third
and
down.
seven,
Yep.
and they bust. So, and no, that's happened fairly consistently throughout the year. So I would say Florida probably gets or Georgia probably gets C's across the board. Beck throwing the picks is really bad, and the defense getting bullied when Florida's offense has one means of moving the ball down the field at all, like ever giving up any yardage, is not a good sign. And then the
Yeah.
Georgia fans were complaining about it as they were walking out of the field, and they were pissed. They
I
were
feel like
really
they
not
have to know, and I've seen a couple talk on Twitter and even talk to me, and it's that I think they know this is just not as good of a Georgia team as in recent years. And they are, while they may make the college football playoff, they could very well even make the SEC championship game. As of this time, they're now at the top of the SEC standing, sitting at 5-1 with Texas A&M. But it's just like I don't know if really they've got the gusto to really do this. So, all right, let's get out of here. I'll do my grades real quick and then we'll call it a show. So for me, I would say the Gators offense, they get a C. I think that, obviously a very average performance after DJ Lagway went down. They weren't able to move the ball, and that is unfortunate to see. For a defense, I would say C minus. or I'll go C plus. C plus. I think they kept them in this game, but ultimately the dam broke. The dam broke, like you said. But good kudos to the 3 turnovers. They gave Florida a chance to win. Special teams, I'll go D. They certainly had the kicks that enabled, but that one was so costly. And then honestly, if that doesn't happen and Florida makes that kick, could it be a completely different game in the fourth quarter? Maybe even a 10-point Florida lead if Georgia doesn't get the ball back in that field position. Coaching, I'll say D. I think that, it's just bizarre situational football not to potentially play a scholarship quarterback when you have him. And just the play calling. It's so unimaginative at times. The route trees, even when DJ Lagway was in at times, was not very good. So, and then of course, shout out to the fans. We already talked about that. But all right, Neil, I think that about calls it a show. This was a tough loss with another reality check for the Gators. Florida falls to Georgia once again, but we've got some football left, and hopefully this team will show a little bit of fight. Make sure if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below. Leave a like, leave a comment, your reaction to the game. And if you haven't already, head over to theheadsandtails.com. We're in store here in Tampa. Buy some of that merch this football season using the code IAKOW30 for 30% off on your purchase. So from all of us here at the All Kinds Weather Forecast, signing off from another great episode.